Hi, my name is Rachel Saunders. Welcome to this episode of the Temporal Hospitality podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit that bell, and check out the link below for the script with all citations in. On 20th of January 1942, it was a bitterly cold day just outside Berlin. Ice clung to the trees, snow covered the ground, and outside the villa a cohort of drivers waited. Inside, 15 men sat down to decide the fate of millions of Jews and other people deemed unworthy of life in the conquered German territories. At the head of the table was SS General Reinhard Heydrich, Chief of Reich Security Main Office, whose ruthless agenda coldly oversaw the proposal for the final solution of the Jews in Europe, a wholesale mass murder. Alongside him was SS Major General Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo, who was pivotal in making the Gestapo the central executive organ of National Socialist terror. Müller's Gestapo was pivotal for turning slaughter that was being conducted under the Einsatzgruppen in the Eastern conquests into the reign of terror which rounded up millions across Europe. Finally, the organizer of the conference and man widely considered the architect of the Holocaust mechanistic slaughter, Adolf Eichmann, outlined the practicalities of genocide. To be in that room was to experience the horrific banality that the Third Reich pivoted into, the depths of depravity in the name of cleansing Europe of those deemed unworthy of life. How we frame power and power politics invariably comes down to those who have the biggest guns, most ships, and sharpest sticks. Weapons, and the willingness to use them, have historically framed the use of power. Yet, often, the most pivotal moments in history have come down to which room you belong in. Here, I lay out the hidden aspects of power, working through the notion that true power is not wielded at the point of a gun or nuclear missile, but in the mediated conversations and behind closed doors meetings which have dictated the direction global history has taken. Hamilton's famous song epitomizes our desire to be in the room where the decisions are taken and the turning of the historic wheel happens. Every point in history has such a moment, where decision makers come together to chart out a course they wish to follow, which in turn impacts millions of lives. August 1914 saw such a chain of meetings, starting the morning after the assassination in Sarajevo and culminated in German forces going over the border into Belgium. We know, in retrospective, that any of those meetings, German, Austrian, Russian, French and British officials could have put the brakes on the oncoming calamity. Yet, due to the reasons of national pride and prestige, they decided to roll the dice of war. Britain's involvement in the Great War was not a given. Indeed, the decision to declare war on Germany was taken as much to keep the German Navy in check as it was to honour an 80-year-old treaty defending Belgian neutrality. What happened in those rooms led to the shattering of empires and the destruction of millions of lives. Hannah Arendt laid out in Origins of Totalitarianism that a central issue with decision-making was its opaqueness and lack of accountability. Mistakes and miscalculations happen, especially when those making those decisions may be doing so from a place of fear, nationalism, or xenophobia. Working through this requires asking why power becomes centralized and why the impact of what happens in those rooms is never to learn the lesson that scrutiny is a valuable asset. Yet, the counterpoint to this is that often those sorts of meetings happen because those who conduct them want to do so without the mob being at their back. In democracies, elected officials have decision-making responsibilities, while in autocracies, secrecy is the whole point of the apparatus of state. What do we, as the general public, expect of our leaders, and why is it that scrutiny only becomes necessary when things go wrong? The Wannsee Conference was held in total secrecy because if the world had discovered the organised slaughter, it would have driven all the persecuted towards extreme resistance. Heydrich and Eichmann both understood this, hence why, even at the gates of death in the camps, the death chambers were disguised as showers. Barbarity requires a veneer of civility to prevent resistance, especially when those who are about to be debased have the means and opportunities to resist. Theresienstadt fooled the world long enough to allow the mechanized slaughter, while Eichmann's closed-door meetings with Jewish leaders mollified enough of them to prevent significant resistance to the Shoah. The July to August 1945 Potsdam Conference only included British, American and Soviet representatives, during which the fate of Eastern Europe was decided. Polish, Romanian, Bulgarian, Latvian, Estonian, Lithuanian and a wide array of other stakeholders were excluded from the conversation, which in turn led to the acceptance by Britain and America that the Soviet Union was entitled to dominate their sphere of influence. Those smoke-filled rooms laid the foundation for a Cold War, a 45-year period in which the rights of tens of millions were signed away for a fractured peace. What Stalin, Churchill and Truman discussed in private has never publicly been disclosed, but what is clear is that those who were excluded were the ones who bore the heaviest burden from it. Aside from the closed geography, Potsdam and Wannsee shared two things. First is the unilateral nature of the discussion, that those in the room felt empowered to make decisions in which those impacted had absolutely no say in the decision making. The second is that the outcomes were far-reaching and required a reshaping of the mindset of all those involved in its implementation. This is why the song in Hamilton gets our attention, because we understand the unilateral nature of the discussions and the impact these decisions have. Yet, as hinted earlier, all countries hold regular closed-door meetings which reshape and impact those living in their borders. That no democracy, let alone any autocracy, allows the cleansing light of scrutiny into the decision-making process. Unilateral decisions are antithetical to democratic sensibilities, yet we fundamentally accept them to allow the functions of state to happen. Where the line between autocracy and democracy lies is in the accountability in the aftermath of the resulting fallout. When things go right, decision-making is rarely held up to scrutiny, and when it is the end result of best practices, it ends up being exemplars for others to use. A clear example of this was the January 1943 Casablanca conference between Roosevelt and Churchill, at which the next phase of the Allied war effort was laid out. Those decisions received scrutiny from Stalin, in part due to the delay in the invasion of Northern Europe till 1944. But, more broadly, it was the decision to invade Italy which ended up impacting the lives of the millions of soldiers and civilians who were caught up in the Italian campaign. How those decisions played out shaped post-war Italian politics, brought destruction to historic landscapes, and ushered in the end of the Italians on the Axis side. Was the invasion the wrong decision? No. It, or something like it, needed to happen. It is now up to history to unpack and unravel those backroom meetings and decisions. To a point, this raises the question about whether the Hollywoodization of war has shaped our understanding of accountability and unilateral decision-making. Films show us the machinations that go into why something happens, as if the audience does not understand it leaves threads hanging over the plot. This is, few films happen in media res without context or allowing the audience to peek behind the curtain. The room where it happens is a space of engagement and reasoning, a place of fantasy and intrigue. We all feel like Aaron Burr at those crucial moments, pondering, wondering. Essentially, we are the drivers in the snow, never the ones sat at the table. Retelling the history for its own sake is complicated because the fantasy of knowing outweighs the reality of a veil of ignorance. There are hundreds of examples we can reach for in fiction where the audience is privy to the information characters are unaware of. Philosophically, this asks us what we expect from the world when we inherently are ignorant of the practical realities of the world we live in. This extends from the top of government all the way down to the lowest council committee. The quintessential scene in the Oval Office is used as a shorthand for the machinery of state, as, unless we are watching The West Wing or Veep, shows rarely take the time to look at the sausage factory. 2001's Conspiracy is horrific precisely because of how banal it is. There is no need to show fictive monsters when the actual people were capable of such barbarity. What happens behind closed doors is the scary part because we can project our fears and imaginings onto the participants, reshaping the end result in attempts to justify why it happened. Which is why the far-reaching consequences demanded justification. It is not enough to state that 1 million people died, or were displaced or ended up in poverty. We all seek to rationalise the end result to overcome the inherent irrationality of in-the-moment decisions. Sometime after Truman became US President on 12 April 1945, he was made aware of the Manhattan Project, and during the Potsdam Conference, he issued the demand for the Japanese government to unconditionally surrender. 11 days later, on August 6th, Enola Gay dropped Little Boy on Hiroshima, ushering in the atomic age. 80,000 people died in the initial explosion, with thousands more succumbing to radiation sickness. 3 days later, Nagasaki was destroyed, with 39,000 dying in the initial blast. His decision-making processes are shrouded in mystery, as he did not leave any record as to why he chose to make the decision. In hindsight, it is easy to say that it prevented hideous casualties on both sides, yet around 119,000 still lost their life to prevent maybe 1 million or more deaths. War makes us all into armchair generals in the aftermath, and it's easy to pick apart those dark rooms, though the reality is that the price was paid to secure a fragile global peace. Everybody enjoys playing Monday morning quarterback because we are not the ones who get to make the hard choices. I suggest this is why those rooms exist, and why in reality no one truly wants to be in there, because they do not have to make those choices. Psychologically, why do you want to be the decision maker? Why do you want those burdens? For all the responsibility lies on your shoulders. It is impossible to know for sure the full consequences of where those decisions will lead, especially when those decisions are always made without the fullness of the facts. Most of the time, the consequences play out in a satisfactory manner, yet even a successful outcome can cause harm and suffering. Hiroshima and Nagasaki both suffered dreadfully from radioactive fallout, with birth defects and generational trauma lingering in the aftermath of the fragile peace. Those who died in the long tail are not numbered in the 119,000, yet they are just as much victims to the rooms where the decisions were made. This then asks us to consider the needs of others when weighing up the decisions we all make. Could the leaders in 1914 have charted another course instead of ending up in the trenches by Christmas? Yes, and they probably would have if they could foresee what their actions had ended up. No German official would have wanted winter 1918 in summer 1914. Kaiser Wilhelm would have stepped back, and the British cabinet would have walked away from Belgium. Or, at least that is what any rational person would have done given the future evidence. However, politics is not about rational decision making, it is about the best course of action given the available evidence. This begs the question about duty, honour and accountability. Duty to one's nation requires integrity to uphold, especially when there are many competing interests. Closed-door meetings without any accountability and scrutiny can and does lead to accusations of backroom deals and decisions that are made against the interests of the common citizens. Yet, who gets to decide what duty looks like? If duty is sacrificing a part of yourself for the common good, then those background deals begin to look a lot like self-service rather than a duty to one's people. How this conception of duty cuts across the hard decision making all those people with responsibility needing to make them in times of trouble. Truman's bombing of Japan required secrecy to prevent prior knowledge of the bombing. D-Day required utmost secrecy to ensure success, and the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved through a series of backroom conversations to prevent nuclear war. Duty alone does not make decision making better or worse. It simply places an expectation on those involved to avoid using secrecy to further their own interests at the expense of everybody else's. This, of course, is the ideal. In reality, politics is much more complicated. Kaiser Wilhelm's decision-making in August 1914 was clouded by his personal desire to both retain his throne and exert German hegemony over Europe. The Second Reich was a relative newcomer to the game of colonies, meaning that the Kaiserreich had an inferiority complex about British domination over trade and territory. The decisions made across weeks leading up to the outbreak of World War I were rooted in duties to one's country and what was needed to uphold the power of the various empires. Wilhelm and his court were caught in a bind. They were spoiling for war to prove German might once more. Yet, in upholding their duty towards Austria, the Germans were caught between the vice of Russia on one side and France on the other. Every decision made by the German government was made out of a desire to not lose prestige, while also needing to avert a catastrophic pincer movement from France and Russia. War was not inevitable, but the calculus was made inscrutable because the Germans needed a plan to succeed, and they needed a plan to be made in secret. What compounded the closed-door sections all over Europe in summer 1914 was a desire to protect national honour, and this, I suggest, cuts to the heart of why much of what happens behind closed doors does so. No nation or business wants the sausage-making process, the grubby detail and selling of souls, to be made public, lest the public see it for the self-serving it actually is. Honour, in the sense that we use it for nationalistic purposes, has led many countries to do dark things. The Wannsee Conference was framed as upholding the honour of the Third Reich through the twisted necessity of removing those felt to be unclean from German society. National honour has led to the implementation of strict national secrecy protocols to the point that it has become impossible to scrutinise what actually happens due to redactions and destruction of documents. Honour has led many national institutions to bury unsavoury elements of national policy, doctrine and actions, meaning that when we do come to analyse and scrutinise, we only have the crumbs to pick over. Honour has led many people to desire to keep information hidden lest the sausage-making process brings shame to those involved. Even in societies such as the United States, which have enshrined freedom of speech as an absolute right, the US government has locked a significant portion of government decision-making behind secrecy laws. Top secret serves to protect a nation's daily business. Yet, by tying absolute secrecy to a nation's honour, we cannot scrutinise a nation's decision-making process. This in turn means that any lessons that could be learnt are often lost or hidden in the depths of history. This is why honour is problematic, as it is often simply used as a synonym for national pride. Which brings us back full circle to accountability. If honour and pride are the driving forces behind national politics, then accountability is the lifeblood of all functioning governments. Without accountability, all governments will fall apart under the weight of their own hubris over time. Autocracies always fail because they become too detached from their populaces. No dictatorship or autocratic regime survives without accountability, and even then, the sorts of accountability they will accept is held behind closed doors. This is because the national honour and pride demands that the public perception of the nation is one of strength and prosperity. This is why propaganda is used to twist understanding of the state. It then, in turn, asks us to question what a nation is even for. Nation-states are not preordained entities, they are shaped and reshaped through political processes. The United States owes its existence to a long series of backroom deals, which Hamilton explicitly calls out. The US could have turned out any number of ways, yet due to machinations by the Founding Fathers, the United States of America became the shape which was formed after the Revolutionary War. The same for the inception of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland in 1801. It is in the propaganda for the benefit of landed elites who wanted stability to order their economic affairs. Backroom deals created two unified nations who in turn have used propaganda to keep the concept of a nation at the forefront of the population's minds. Wannsee, the sparking of World War I and the founding of the United States draw together the urgent need to hold those making deals in dark rooms to account. All three led to mass slaughter, a deeper entrenching of nationalism, and a failure to lead the actual lessons they represent. Wannsee's central tension was that the banality of the state can only be overcome through integrity. World War I's central lesson was not to allow presumption and national pride to drag a nation into unwanted war. And the United States' biggest lesson is that when a nation is founded behind closed doors with no input from those who are being unwillingly locked in, it takes a civil war to partially correct the corrosive, toxic mess that the US Constitution became, and, to a point, still is. To draw this all together, at what point does the room where it happens become shorthand for every conspiracy theory imaginable? Hindsight is the greatest gift and curse of human history, and our fevered imaginations can project onto those rooms any theory we want in absence of evidence. We only know about Wannsee because one of the attendees did not destroy the minutes like he was ordered to. Thus, one of the darkest moments in the 20th century has a record which we can scrutinise. Yet, anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers still persist in their denials of the slaughter of millions through mechanised camps. So, what happens in the room is vital for us to understand, as otherwise conspiracy theories can dictate the conversation and create propaganda which harms all societies.